think of our home as our place of safety.
The police appealed to people in the area to make sure their windows and doors are locked before going to bed.
He was actively seeking homes with people in them, or staying in homes waiting for people to return to them.
No one was safe, men, women. It might be you next.
The hunt for the gunman began in the early hours of this morning after a woman was raped in her home.
In the summer of 1984, a man who became known as the Fox terrorized thousands and thousands of people.
It affected the entire community. It affected the entire country.
When they came home, the light bulbs in the hall had been removed.
Doesn't bear thinking, does it? Some sort of voodoo display on your sitting room floor.
It was everybody's worst nightmare. All you see is the dark outline in the shadows.
We were dealing with a very, very dangerous man.
I think if someone resists him, I've no doubt whatsoever that he will kill.
You just couldn't guess where he was going to strike next.
He was there. He was in our garden.
People were absolutely terrified. Members of a street would get together and say, well, how many shotguns have you got?
A child's toy makes an ideal cover for a hidden kitchen knife.
Trying to find this man was really looking for a needle in a haystack.
This was a full-scale fox hunt. Was I working hard enough? Were we not doing something?
This is the most serious offence he's committed. It's a despicable offence. He's an animal.
I just wanted to catch him. He's a bad man. This is going to get worse.
It's at the back of your mind as you put the key in the lock. Is somebody already in here?
Bedfordshire is a small county. It's a lovely county to live in. In the 80s, we could go to some of the villages in North Bedfordshire where people would leave their windows open, doors open, certainly wouldn't lock a front door during the day, and time had stood still as if it was in the 50s.
I started off in Teesside, where the stories were always huge, huge. And then I went down to Bedfordshire. I was like tearing my hair out because I thought, oh my God, nothing happens here. It was middle class and pretty affluent. It did feel really safe. And it was a huge shock, really, when we had this huge story blowing up in our area. We were really surprised.
I was on a routine visit to the CID office at Leighton Buzzard, early March, and the local scenes of crime officer said to me, we've got a strange set of burglaries out in the villages.
I was the detective sergeant in charge of the scenes of crime and photographic units. The local scenes of crime officers were seeing a pattern of burglaries developing within the Leighton Buzzard area. The offender was using a flat-bladed screwdriver, which had got a corner missing off of it, so quite distinctive. They were also nighttime burglaries. Nighttime burglaries aren't that common. The premises normally are more secure.
This felt different from the very start. It was local to my division, so it was clearly my responsibility. There's not millions of burglaries in Bedfordshire, but there's quite a few. You know, even in a small place like Leighton Buzzard, but they just had a different feel to the normal burglary.
Unoccupied houses were being broken into and cash stolen. But the strange thing was that he's searching and finding holiday photographs and is setting them out in a sort of horseshoe shape. And also belts and ties had been laid out, which were clearly put there to tie someone up.
Imagine going home and seeing some sort of voodoo display on your sitting room floor. Terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
We'd probably got about 5 or 6 of these burglaries spread out over quite a wide area of the local villages around Leighton Buzzard.
It was obvious that there was something odd going on.
We're getting a few of these now. It's not just a one-off. But in these burglaries, he hadn't assaulted anybody, and they were dealt with at a fairly local level.
Bedfordshire used to go by, in my era, the family force, because it was small, one of the smallest forces in the country. You tended to know most people. I very quickly became aware of a series of burglaries, but then we had a report of an incident at a house in the Linslade area of Bedfordshire.
A 74-year-old lady went to bed, did a bit of reading, and was semi-asleep. She was dozing.
The lady was home alone, in her night dress, in her bed, when this man broke in.
She thought she'd heard a noise, and then she realised that there was someone else in the room. When she looked up, she saw the man, and he had big gauntlet gloves on, like motorcycle gloves. He held the gauntlet gloves up above his face so she couldn't see him.
She was certainly so horrified and intimidated by him that she just complied with what he wanted to do. And she was sexually assaulted within her own home. And once that assault was over, he left. Who thinks of our grandparents being home alone and being victim of a crime like that?
A liaison officer was put with her to look after her and help her. And obviously then there was an investigation into try and identify who this person was. It was discovered that the attack on the elderly lady and the earlier burglaries were linked because of the same screwdriver mark that was used to break into the various houses.
We had something out of the ordinary here, but this was taking it up to a different level.
It's obviously a very serious crime and it's being dealt with as such, but it was being dealt with as an isolated incident, and there was no way we could anticipate what was going to take place over the next few months. We now have a series of burglaries that have now been linked to the attack on the elderly lady, and these are being dealt with by the local CID.
We could all see that this was something entirely different.
So although it was serious, there were a lot of other things going on in the police force at the time, especially with the miners' strike.
This was the line of police vehicles in what was the biggest single police operation since the strike began. Men from 9 forces converged on the steel plant, which earlier Arthur Scargill had vowed would be sealed off by the pickets.
Bedfordshire, like nearly every other force in the country, had provided officers to South Yorkshire and to Nottingham.
We were stretched, no doubt about that. Trying to just fulfil the day-to-day policing of the area.
The strain on police forces throughout the country was enormous. But justice deserves that this man has got to go to court and be punished for what he's doing. And you've got to protect potential victims. but it was very much down to the local CID to deal with it.
This became a very serious investigation after the offence in Leighton Buzzard on the night of the 8th of June 1984.
A middle-aged couple had been out for a social evening at the local golf club.
When they came home, they switched the light on and it was in darkness. The light bulbs in the hall had been removed.
They found that in their lounge area, the equivalent of a den had been made where chairs were moved and like a little hide had been created.
They must have looked at it and thought, my God, whatever's happening here? I think that the den was created so that nobody could see the light from the television outside.
He'd also removed from a wardrobe a number of belts, a number of ties. It would appear that he'd gone in with the intention of committing some sort of assault.
They went into the kitchen in a state of shock, thinking someone's probably still in the house, and found that someone had made themselves a cup of tea and made themselves something to eat. But having searched the house, there was no one there. He'd panicked and ran out.
One of the things they did notice was missing was some food out of the kitchen, and in particular, a large bag of peanuts.
He'd obviously been in that house for quite some time. Somebody had set themselves up perhaps to lay in wait for their return. That's a bit weird.
They were very concerned and they rang 999 straight away, and the police attended almost immediately.
The officers that attended the scene wouldn't have realised the offender that night carried on and broken into a further property not a long distance away from there.
He broke into another house in the Heath and Reach area of Leighton Buzzard.
He came in quietly, didn't disturb the occupants, and managed to go right through the house, upstairs and into the bedroom. The man and a woman asleep in bed, safe and sound. And they were disturbed and woken up by seeing a man at the bottom of their bed with a shotgun.
He was wearing a mask made out of trouser legs with 2 eyes cut and a little bit cut for the mouth.
It was quite a towering, imposing, frightening situation to be confronted with as you wake up.
Your first reaction might be, am I dreaming? But when you see what reality is, the shock and the fear that must go through you is almost unimaginable.
The householder realised what was happening, realised somebody had broken in and tackled him, very bravely tackled him. There was a scuffle, a fight, and the gun went off.
You've then got the huge noise of a shotgun going off in a small residential bedroom.
The victim was hit in the hand and he lost a finger. The victim is obviously shocked. He's got blood shooting everywhere. The offender ran down the stairs, ran out into the neighbourhood and disappeared.
They rang the police and the police quickly attended.
They'd already been at the earlier house. A dog search was put in immediately, but we were unable to trace the offender. But by now we knew we were dealing with a very serious series of crimes.
I was called out to come into Dunstable Police Station. There'd been a couple of incidents that had happened and they needed to set up an incident room.
There are two scenes, one where the den was and one where the shooting took place.
The local scenes of crime officers attended both of the scenes, examining the scenes for fingerprint evidence and forensic evidence. Instrument marks, shoe prints, fibres, blood, any body fluids.
Things are taking place at the scene. Witnesses are being interviewed. My job is collating that information that's coming in.
My reaction when I'd heard about the two scenes was a bit mystified, to be quite honest. Extraordinary, actually. It's sort of totally different.
I'd never seen that before in my CID career, and neither of any of the people I'd worked with. The peanuts that had been stolen from the first house, the packet was found in the house where the shooting had taken place. So we were able to get a link almost immediately between the two offences.
It was given an operation name, and the operation name was Operation Peanut.
This is a big incident. Somebody's been seriously injured, could have been killed quite easily. And information gets out to the press and other members of the public.
We got an indication that there had been a break-in and somebody had been shot. I mean, shootings of any type back in the early 80s was such a rare event, and our sort of noses twitched.
Every day, you know, someone would be calling the Bedfordshire Police Control Room to get the crime sheet. And okay, it seemed a bit strange, but strange things sometimes happen.
I remember we wrote the story, but it was the sort of thing that was only covered by the local radio and the local newspapers at that time.
Articles appeared in the local newspaper and on the radio. Apparently somebody had been shot in the hand, just a couple of streets away from our house.
Shootings just did not happen. It was unheard of. You know, there was very little crime. It felt very, very safe.
Obviously, your ears prick up a little bit when it's close to home. People were coming in the off-licence, and one or two would come in and say, oh, that was bad. That happened in Leighton, wasn't it? But then no one envisaged that it was going to escalate.
The day after the shooting, we had no idea that there was something brewing there. There was a serious criminal in their midst.
A small team of detectives were put on to investigate those crimes.
Within a short period of time, it was apparent that it was the same person that had sexually assaulted the elderly lady in her 70s.
The link was established on the way the offender was getting into the premises. They were using a flat-bladed screwdriver.
This is the same screwdriver. It was the same guy, same person. We circulated to neighbouring forces as to what happened to see whether or not they had any similar offences. We bordered Hertfordshire on one side and Thames Valley Police on the other side. Other offences came to light, clearly that were connected.
When we re-investigated every single burglary, that turned out to be something like about 40 burglaries.
It reached figures which, quite honestly, were shocking to us. One of the most horrendous events that came to light took place in Cheddington, which is just a few miles away from Leighton Buzzard.
In early May, a house in Cheddington was broken into. The offender clearly thought it was a home that was occupied by a family because there were toys in the garden, a swing. He broke in and found that he was in the house on his own. He searched the house and he found a shotgun. Clearly that is where he got his gun from. He sat in the house waiting for the occupants to return. The occupier of the house arrived home. And he was confronted by the offender wearing a mask and using the owner's shotgun to threaten him. The offender told him to sit down, and then he tied him up with ties that he'd already found in the property. And he committed a series of sexual assaults on the man that were both degrading and really, really upsetting.
It was crazy. People couldn't believe it. And there was a term, rape, indecent assault. The thought always triggers that a woman has been assaulted by a man, which is usually the case, invariably the case. But in this instance, it was a man who'd been assaulted by another man.
We already knew we had something that was very serious, but this again ratcheted it up even more. This man, this offender, was determined.
We were dealing with a very, very dangerous man who was prepared to use unspeakable violence. He is indiscriminate as far as age was concerned, and he was indiscriminate on the type of sexual attack he carried out.
He's got away with an indecent assault. He's got away, as we found out at Cheddington, with a serious sexual attack on a man, and he hasn't been caught. And the fear was that it would get worse, and of course it did.
By mid-June, we have identified there has been a series of burglaries that have been either quite straightforward break-ins or assaults on the people inside their homes.
Somebody was on our patch who was a serial offender and was obviously gaining more and more confidence.
He was actively seeking homes with people in them or staying in homes waiting for people to return to them. He was prepared to go into a bedroom where people were sleeping, a man and a woman. He was prepared to assault a man on his own. This is someone who needs to be stopped.
A major incident room on any inquiry is the hub of the inquiry. I was brought in because I had a lot of experience working in major incident rooms. We all had one aim in mind: to arrest somebody and bring these horrible crimes to an end.
Trying to find this man was really looking for a needle in a haystack.
We had a total blank canvas when it came to try and picture who this offender could be. This could be anyone.
From the witness statements, he was nothing out of the ordinary. Average height, slim, build, between 20s and 30s. And what we have to remember is the offender wore a mask. So because of that, we couldn't identify any facial features.
The witnesses didn't know what his face looked like, but we did know he had this accent, and it wasn't clear where it was from.
One person thought it was a Birmingham accent, one person thought it was a local accent.
We didn't have any description of a motor vehicle at all. No one had seen a car.
We knew he was quite happy to be out and about at night. And what could his background be? Is he a night worker?
Was this a person who was sleeping rough? Was this a person that perhaps had got some sort of odour about him? There was no evidence of this from any of the victims.
He was an adult man. Isn't he married? Isn't somebody missing him on an evening?
The victims seem to have been chosen at random. Our best guess as to why this man was doing this was that he was a loner and he wanted to have some kind of sexual contact.
We look for people who have similar MOs. Is it a burglar who's become a sexual offender? Or is it a sexual offender who's become a burglar?
We're in 1984, no DNA, no CCTV, no mobile phones, no cameras on motorways, no social media. So we had to rely on eliminating the groups of people we were investigating as possible suspects.
But effectively, it could be anybody. We had no pointers to direct us into any particular course of inquiry.
I was working all the hours given to try and trace the suspect, whilst my wife at home, with my 2-year-old son at the time, was on her own for hours on end. I had to catch him, not for the general public only, but for my family as well.
I was coming home to an empty house after a day in Dunstable Police Station. It's at the back of your mind as you put the key in the lock to go in your door, is somebody already in here?
I know my own family, my own wife, she was frightened. I mean, I used to come home at night, you know, and there was all the dock locks and everything on the doors, and, you know, the dog was in the hall, you know, it's never allowed in the hall normally.
It was decided that we needed a covert operation to catch this man, and that's where Detective Constable Richard Hanks came in.
This whole inquiry was teamwork, and I was organising logistics for covert and overt surveillance.
The offender always committed offences during the evening and overnight. So that was why we had the night observation posts.
We had about 20 officers on a nighttime operation.
Officers were in covert vehicles with radio communication.
The control for the night operation was called Peanut Control. So every team that went out had a peanut number.
They were placed strategically in and around where the offences had been committed.
At road junctions, at bridges where canals or rivers met with roads. If this suspect is moving, we must be able to get the maximum amount of coverage of these areas with the resources to hand.
They had night cameras, night vision glasses.
The equipment came from the military. For the 1980s, the equipment was quite sci-fi. I remember one was like a helmet that you wore, and the goggles came down, flipped down over your eyes.
They were on the lookout for anything suspicious at all that they could see. And also, if we had a 999 call, they would be in the immediate area so they could respond as quickly as we possibly could.
We started to hear that there was covert police operations underway, and there were sort of tips that sort of police were hiding in hedges and using undercover tactics. I went to the police and basically asked them, have you got something on the go? And we were suddenly told under no circumstances go any further. We were sworn to silence.
The concern was with the public that they would become very, very worried indeed when they heard what was happening.
Clearly, we didn't want the offender to know that we had covert operations because the main purpose of that was to catch him.
They thought that they would have the resources in place to be able to spring a trap. But the night operations were clearly unsuccessful because he struck again.
In early July, a young, newly married couple are fast asleep in bed in the early hours of the morning. The offender breaks in using his screwdriver to force a window and gain entry.
He crept up the stairs and he found them in bed together and was about to strike when the woman screamed. It was obviously such a loud, sharp, terrified scream that the gunman hesitated.
We're now in the middle of summer, the windows were open. A lot of people could hear this noise. The offender ran down the stairs and ran out.
And at that point, the police came to us and said, look, there's something serious happening. We want to sort of make the public aware now. And we were given a full briefing.
The balance was, how much do we release to the general public and how much do we retain ourselves?
We wanted people to help us with ideas of who the offender could be.
Because the descriptions of the offender were so varied, we needed the public's help more than ever.
And I remember sitting down and writing the story, and it was obvious that this guy was sort of menacing, dangerous. And I was going to call him the Wolf, because he was striking in the middle of the night. But there was an element of cunning about him, and there's only one creature that has such amazing cunning, and it had to be the fox. And then a few days later, that was the night the fox became a full-scale, full-blooded monster. This couple said goodnight to their children, climbed into bed and went to sleep. And then, an hour or so later, the fox struck.
It was everybody's worst nightmare. All you see is the dark outline in the shadows with a gun.
He then gave instructions to tie the husband up and at one stage tied part of the lady to the husband. And he committed an horrendous crime of rape and sexual assault.
I cannot imagine just how terrifying that was. Suddenly being woken up from a deep sleep in the middle of the night, faced with a masked gunman in front of you.
It beggars belief to think what it must be like in that situation when you have your children sleeping in the adjacent rooms. What do you do? That is such a horror.
People's homes should be safe, and the impact must, and I'm sure did, last for a lifetime.
Having carried out its most savage attacks, the fox faded into the night. But the couple alerted the police.
I did a visit the scene and I was told that a track had been made. The police dogs had found a track.
They followed a scent to a nearby woodland where they carried out a full-scale operation.
The police dog obviously is out in the lead. The firearms team came in.
We had the helicopter there, the helicopter above. It's like a war zone. That's exactly how I felt. It's like a war zone.
The hunt for the gunman began in the early hours of this morning after a woman was raped in her home. 60 police officers, some armed, some with dogs and with helicopter cover, have been slowly working their way through the woods, trying to flush out the gunman.
All the national television stations were there. We could see the police carrying out investigations into one of the very busiest railway routes in the country.
They'd had the wood surrounded for quite some time while they undertook a search, but they'd never found the offender.
We were disappointed at the end of the day because we didn't catch him in those woods.
Well, we're very concerned indeed. This is the most serious offence indeed that is committed to date. It's a despicable offence. He's an animal.
I just wanted to catch him. He's a bad man. He's a bad man. This is going to get worse.
The violence had increased, the sexual nature of the offences had increased, and clearly this was a highly dangerous man, and certainly we were concerned that he would, in fact, one of these days, on one of these attacks, kill someone.
The public became aware of the incidents that had been happening.
Slowly but surely, we realised we got a huge story on our hands.
This was now making front-page news. In 1984, Fleet Street was at its height. And the Fox became a household name across the country.
I was on holiday in Devon, and on the front page of every paper was the headlines about the Fox. I'd got family living in that area. This could be happening to my family. I wanted to get back and do my bit.
The police appealed to people in the area to make sure their windows and doors are locked before going to bed. Ironmongers have almost sold out of window and door locks, posters telling potential customers what they already know. The gunman strikes at random, breaking into homes, tying up his victims, raping and assaulting them at gunpoint.
No one was safe, men, women, it might be you next, which was scary, but better to scare people than let them become complacent.
People were in fear. It was across the newspapers all the time, the television.
This area was a safe area, which is why it became such a shock.
I saw a lot of people every day, and it was the talk of the town. A friend of ours, she took her children to her mother's house to stay because she was obviously scared to be by herself.
I remember being really, really hot. It was so hot. We were told, don't leave your windows open, don't have any doors open, so we were all sweltering in our houses.
You couldn't buy window locks for love or money because they were just sold out. My bedroom window was screwed shut. They were old wooden frame single pane glass windows which were weak.
This house is typical of the state of siege. A bar across the patio windows prevents the door from opening. While a mother and two children sleep upstairs, the husband sleeps in the lounge with an array of weapons by his side. Apart from a pickaxe handle and a scythe, a child's toy makes an ideal cover for a hidden kitchen knife.
I personally had a weapon under my bed. It was like a pickaxe handle or something like that.
My mum may have had an axe next to the bed.
Most people got more and more scared as time went on.
You just couldn't guess where he was going to strike next, but it could have been us.
Every time there was a new offence, I felt a bit wounded, to be honest with you, because was I working hard enough? Was I not doing something? Were we not doing something?
I was deployed onto covert night observations. I particularly remember being in the house where the poor man had part of his hand blown off. That was an eerie feeling, being in that house. It brought it home to you, and what must have gone through that victim's mind at the time.
It gives pause for thought for victims of crimes like that. There's no normality after this. I remember the elderly lady from the first incident. She was independent, quite happy and confident. But without a doubt, this incident totally intimidated her, and she no longer felt safe in her own home. She was a lovely lady. Sorry. See, we're not all cold-hearted coppers. Sorry.
There was pressure from the public, there was pressure from the media, and there was pressure from within our own organisation that we were successful, that we actually caught this man. So no effort was being spared.
We increased the number of officers that we had on the surveillance, on observations at night.
We made a conscious decision to work with the media.
We wanted people to help us. We wanted people to be aware of what was going on.
One of the things that was relatively new at the time was a programme on BBC called Crime Watch.
It was quite a new programme, very new programme.
Crime Watch went out nationally, so hopefully that could bring in some information from outside our general area.
It was one of the first links in communication with the general public and with the media.
We stood by the phones waiting for the calls to come in.
But as Brian Prickett was making his appeal on Crime Watch, that night the Fox carried out an attack that made him one of the most dangerous criminals the country has ever seen.
Everyone was absolutely desperate for it to be over.
There were attacks in the northeast, there were attacks in the southeast. Where was he going to attack next?
How could a man like this terrorise so many people?
We were trying to do our best. We were doing the best that I thought we could ever have done.
This was where we got a lot of information. She was very good at giving us a few more clues.
After all this time, all these months of working, we had a breakthrough.
This is a tape I've got of the Fox talking. This tape has never been heard before in public.